in Schoology. It's not currently in Schoology. All right. What we did yesterday is we talked again about the DNA. We talked about that protein folding of how the different amino acids change, how it all folds together. We talked about if it doesn't fold properly, you get mutations. For this, we're going to talk about mutations that can be a genetic disorder like Maggie has, but there are also genetic differences that aren't a disorder. That's actually harmless to your body, to any other thing. So we're going to get into that again. All right. Let me... Now we have a word that I think we've seen, but we haven't really talked about what it is. So that word is an allele. And what an allele is it's just a different version of a gene. Kind of like what we talked about with the genetic differences between Maggie's that was mutated and the normal gene. It's just a different version of a gene. We're going to talk about one that's harmless. Doesn't hurt your body. It's not going to change your life expectancy. It's not going to cause any symptoms. It is going to cause a different trait. So there is an allele that produces tightly folding keratin. Keratin is just the protein in your hair that gives it the structure. So if I have tightly folding keratin, I'm going to have curly hair. And if I have, if I have looser folding protein, in this case keratin, it's going to result in straight hair. Now, it doesn't take somebody who's a geneticist to figure out there are different levels of curly and straight, right? There are people that have really tightly curled hair, looser curled, really straight hair, wavy hair. So I'm really oversimplifying it. And we're just kind of reducing it to two opposites. But the reality is it's not that simple. But for now, we're just going to look at that. For alleles, we show them as different letters. Let's see. Now, we've been doing a lot of letters. We've been doing letters of A, T, C, G, and U. We've been doing letters of 3-letter abbreviations for amino acids. So now I'm throwing in a different type of lettering system. But hopefully it won't confuse you. Now, in this case, our allele 1, I'm going to draw as a capital H. And there's a reason it's a capital H. And my allele 2, I'm going to write as a lowercase h, but they're both H's. It matters that one of them is capital, and it matters that the other one is lowercase, or that it's big versus small. That matters. And you'll see that later on. Okay, so this is just that review of everything we've been talking about. Codons determine what amino acid it is. Remember, codons are those 3 base pairs. And then those amino acids, as we learned about yesterday, practiced yesterday, affects how it folds, and how it folds affects the shape of the protein. And then that last thing is that it affects the trait. In this case, oh my gosh. Sorry, everybody. All right. So now we're going to kind of talk about mutations. These different alleles happen because of mutations. So a mutation creates a new gene. And remember, a mutation is only that I'm changing something in the gene. So specifically that part of the gene as being the codon. Slide it up here. Do you guys need this front light off, or is it okay? You good? Okay. All right, here's what you're gonna do. Grab your marker. Each of you grab a marker. So everybody should be holding a marker. If you don't have enough markers, raise your hand. I can get kind of moved around to different. Yeah, make sure it's not a permanent marker. We used permanent markers last hour, so make sure it's not permanent. I almost used a permanent marker when I wrote on the board. Here's what you're going to do. Each one of you is going to write a different kind of mutation. We talked about 3 different kinds of mutations. There were other ones I showed you, but we really only focused on 3 different kinds of mutations. That's because on the project, we're only going to be looking at 3 different types of mutations for your specific projects. So what I want you to do is each person should write down 1 mutation. If there are 4 of you at a table, that is fine. What you are going to do is going to come next. If there's only 2 of you, 1 of you write it once, and then another person write it twice. What are the different types of mutations? Think back. You can, I suggest, possibly, if they aren't at the tip of your tongue, which if I were you, probably wouldn't be, go back to your notes about genetic mutations. There were 3 kinds that we had talked about. Like I said, we gave examples of other ones. Look at your notes. You're right. It affects amino acids, but there's 3 different names of different kinds of mutations that cause those amino acids. So just go ahead, write down what those mutations are. Again, if there's 2 of you, 1 of you write 1, the other one's going to write 2. Don't worry, it's going to get fair in a second. Genetic mutation. Of those mutation types is going to write down, is that a point mutation or a frame shift mutation? Remember, there's 2 of them are going to be frame shift, 1 is going to be point. Okay? Look in your notes. Yep, it's in your notes. It should be in your notes. Where's your notes on? You guys have nothing on your whiteboard. How come? Pull out your notes on mutations. Is it this one? What's it say? Yep. Look on the one that says genetic mutations. It's on multiple pages in your notes. It is almost on every single page in your notes. And you were here. That part. So each one of them is either going to be a frame shift or a point mutation. And there's going to be 2 that are frame shift and 1 that's a point mutation. Here's your notes. Here's your notes. You shouldn't have to say it like 5 times. The project in a week is going to be really tricky.
Oh, I just caught on.
There we go.
I just caught on.
I knew you'd get it. All right, here's what I'm going to do.
Can you explain it to your neighbor then?
Everybody got 3? Everybody got it if it's a frame shift or a point. Okay, so what are the 3 types of mutations that we have? What do you see? Help each other out. You look up and see what kind of is it a frame shift or I'll look through and see if you can find where's your notes on
That's somewhere working. That is nasty. Go back to your notes. That's nasty. I would throw up. That's nasty. I would.
There we go. Nice. You got it. So now we didn't do inversion. It looks very similar to this. There was a picture that showed it. All right, so where's your notes on this? What are the different types of mutations? So go ahead and flip
What? Come over here. Right here. I will answer your questions. Because it was deleted. Like deletion means to delete. Insertion means like to insert and so if you delete or insert, all the other letters just either move over or get bumped, right? So that shifts the whole reading frame. So we read it 3 letters at a time. So if you were reading AC or ATC, and now it's ACG. Here, what was supposed to be ATC is now AGT. So the reading frame is shifted. It's a frame shift. This one's just a point mutation. We keep reading it the same. It's just this one reading frame is different. Everything else will stay the same. And that's what when they talk about point mutations, that's the substitution one. Versus frame shift mutations like insertion.
So sub is different from all of them?
Substitution is it's a point mutation. It's at one point. The other 2 shift the whole frame.
That one is just like a replacement.
Replacement of one letter. It'll change that one reading chunk, right? So it'll maybe make a different. Remember how the amino acids, we figure out what the amino acid is from the 3 letters?
Yep, we got them.
It might change that one amino acid, which might change the way the protein folds. Right? But a frame shift is going to change every single amino acid after that because they're all going to have different letter combinations. And that's a much bigger problem. Does that make sense, or did I? Okay.
It is there. I'm looking literally right at it.
What happened in the advisory?
Who's we saying? It's the same packet. You just have 2 copies of the same packet. Okay. So
Wait, is you? No.
Where it says deletion. In your notes about deletion, is it frame shift or is it point? All right, let's go. Okay. Group 5. Give me one example of a mutation. Deletion. Group 6. Is deletion point or frame shift? Frame shift. Yes. So deletion is one of those kinds of mutations. And it is a frame shift. Remember, if I take something away, that means everything else has to shift over. All right, group 7. What's another type another type of mutation. Substitution. Group 8, is that frame shift or point? Is substitution frame shift or point? There it is. Here's what I remember. I always think about it as sports. I always think about it as soccer because I love soccer because it's the best sport. Sorry if anybody likes anything else. But if I have 11 players on the pitch and I substitute somebody, does my number of players change?
No.
No. I trade one for the other. I still have 11 players, and the rest of the players on the field are still the same. I could substitute more, just like I could substitute more bases. Okay, what's the last kind? What's that? Insertion. All right, group 2. Is insertion a point mutation or a frame shift mutation? Yeah. All right, insertion. The whole thing that we talk about with mutations is that if a mutation changes, it changes the amino acid sequence, and that changes the folding. Now, this was kind of one of the conversations that I heard at a couple of different groups. Is on your notes, when we listed the types of mutations, like I said, we listed a whole bunch of mutations, right? What I want to point out is normal isn't a mutation. Normal is just what we're comparing everything to. This is what it's supposed to be. A mutation is when something goes wrong, right? Either because I take out a base, I put in a base, switch bases around. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about with a mutation, okay? So I just want to make sure that we're understanding mutation, because again, this is going to be something for that test. Okay. So to be clear, in our phenomenon, there is that normal gene. Does Maggie have a normal gene? No. She's got a mutation. Do you remember what her mutated gene, what disease it caused? Nice. Look at you. Cystic fibrosis. Maggie's that person, remember we talked about in the scenario with, yeah, she got the salt on her skin, she's got the wheezy cough, she's like not growing right, she's 7 months old.
Why is there so much things wrong with her?
Because like that is a really good question, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. But
Because it seems like it should just be like one thing. If it's like one gene,
yeah, so
she is dying.
Yes. You want to explain the?
So cystic fibrosis, that gene makes a protein that sits in the membrane of your cell and controls how water gets in and out. So your lungs don't bring enough water in and get filled with this thick mucus that you have trouble coughing up. But then other parts of your body can't bring water into the cells to make them balanced. And that's why your skin ends up with salt crystals, because there's not enough water going in to balance the salt out. So you have skin that is releasing too much salt instead of being like normal sweat that has less salt in it. So there's all these symptoms that comes from one problem, which is cells that can't control the water going in and out of them well.
Which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Is this a real disease?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's affecting other parts of their body too. Her digestive system doesn't bring water in well, so she can't absorb food. That's why she's not growing very well. It's one protein that is just really important for lots of parts of the
Because every
body.
cell is creating those proteins,
Yeah.
basically.
Her life expectancy of someone, yeah, you can use those. Those help break up the mucus in your lungs so you can breathe.
Exactly. Use that. Physical.
The life expectancy of someone with cystic fibrosis is shorter. It's in the 30s and 40s, but some people with treatment and medication and like careful maintenance of it can live a relatively long life.
Yeah.
She probably, if they catch it at this age, she's not going to necessarily die now. She just won't have as long of a life expectancy. Sounds like, do you know somebody with cystic fibrosis? But you are aware of what you have to do to treat it and stuff, yeah. What's up?
So like after you just broke the whole thing down, you really just let them ask if it was real?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a real disease after you just broke?
Yeah. We could have had a theoretical.
We're open to questions in here, Zakai. This is a judgment-free zone for questions.
Okay. Yeah. So let's get into this. Now we're going to come back to this idea of alleles.
Suspicious.
Now that we've talked about different alleles, there is an allele that Maggie has that's different from the allele all of you have. Because I can guarantee none of you in here has cystic fibrosis because it would be pretty obvious. Like we talked about those symptoms. It would be really obvious if you did. So she has an allele, and you guys have an allele. Everybody has an allele for this. All right? So one of those alleles for straight hair structure is a lowercase h. Now, it's going to start to be really important whether we're doing capital or lowercase, whether we're doing big H's or small h's. The other allele for curly texture is the capital H. Now, it says most of these differences are harmless and cause diversity in organisms. Does it hurt you to have curly hair or straight hair? And so they are harmless, but it does lead to diversity. That's why we can all be the same species with different hair texture. In trimester 3, we're going to talk about what may be some advantages of having straight or curly hair. We won't talk about specifically that, but that there are advantages to having different traits. Like we talked about yesterday, we talked about melanin production in certain parts of the world. It's an advantage to have less melanin. Other parts of the world, it's an advantage to have more melanin. Okay, so we're going to get into a different disorder. I can't remember if we talked about this when we watched the video, sickle cell disease. This is one of those that I have had a number of students that have had sickle cell disease. Like in my head, I could list about 3 or 4 students that I remember who have sickle cell. So it is somewhat common, but it is quite rare. I will say, and I couldn't tell you the exact reason this is true, but sickle cell disease tends to happen in some ethnic groups more than others. If your family, relatives, ancestors are from Central, Northern Africa, in the Middle East, you are more likely, means that it can't happen elsewhere, but there's a greater likelihood that you will have sickle cell disease. So if you are African American, because most African Americans came from Central and Northern Europe, Africa, or if you're Arab or Jewish, you're more likely to have sickle cell disease. I know my family, because we're Jewish, there's extra testing that they do when people have certain symptoms, okay? So normally, red blood cells kind of look like this spaghetti-o shape or this donut that still doesn't have the hole in it, or however you want to describe it. When you have sickle cell, the actual red blood cell isn't that sort of normal shape. It bends. So like when you look under a microscope, for Maggie's disorder, I couldn't see anything under a microscope. But with sickle cell disease, because it affects one specific cell, if I look under a microscope and look at blood cells, you can spot it really quickly. All right, so this is what it looks like. Hemoglobin, I think it's actually one of the types of proteins we looked at when we went online and looked at all those things. Hemoglobin is a specific type of protein. Basically, the job of hemoglobin is to hold iron, and that iron allows your body to move oxygen throughout your body. That's why your blood cells are red, is because iron turns red when it rusts. And yeah, so because the iron is attached to the hemoglobin, then that iron it connects to oxygen and it can move it around. So basically, it allows oxygen in your body. So now you can imagine, You can imagine that if you don't get enough oxygen to all the parts of your body, that it's going to cause a lot of issues. Okay? So if you turn the page, you can see some of the symptoms that you might have if you have sickle cell. But we're going to talk about what are some of those, what's kind of that chain reaction that we keep talking about. So there is a single mutation for sickle cell disease, and it changes one of the bases, just one of the bases, which means that it changes one amino acid. Because of that, it now makes that protein with the wrong amino acid. If I have that wrong amino acid, remember when we did all that folding yesterday? If my amino acids are wrong, does it fold in the same shape? No. So that small change affects protein folding. What that causes is that the hemoglobin sticks together. And if you go to the doctor, they actually do hemoglobin count. You look at your blood tests. And when that happens, the red blood cells change shape. So you can see it starts with something really simple. One base in your gene for creating hemoglobin is off. It's not what it's supposed to be, which means the wrong amino acid. The wrong amino acid makes the wrong proteins, which means it doesn't fold properly. So all of these things happen. And so when this happens, it causes sickle cell. All right. And I'm just going to show you again on that image that we looked at before, so you can kind of see the little dots here are those hemoglobin proteins. And you can see that they become different shapes. And because of that, it pulls that red blood cell into that sickle shape. And they're actually skinnier too. All right. Here are some of the complications of sickle cell disease. People with sickle cell disease are more likely to have these things. They're not necessarily guaranteed. You don't see them all the time. But they're more likely to have a stroke. Because remember, a stroke is because your brain is not getting the right blood flow to certain parts of your brain. And then it causes that oxygen deficiency, which causes a stroke. Anemia just means your body isn't carrying enough oxygen, which again makes sense. Usually, and that happens to some people a lot, especially women in pregnancy, that their body isn't getting enough iron, which again means that your body's not able to carry enough oxygen. But normally you just take an iron supplement and that fixes it. If anybody knows somebody with anemia, they tend to be really cold a lot, right? So I think back to one of my students, she always had her jacket on, a blanket on, like she was always cold, even in the summer. Yeah.
You know some people with that?
Yeah.
Or somebody?
Yeah, and the other thing that was really hard for her, like one specific student, is she had really bad pain. All of a sudden, her body would just hurt. And it wasn't like a specific kind of like she did something and it hurt. It was like when it flared up for her, it hurt her so bad, she would just like have to leave the room and go to the nurse. So infections, I had her as a student before COVID. And so when COVID happened, she had to stay home. She had to go to like online school because she was so susceptible to getting COVID. And her hands, I could always see her hands would swell again when she had those flare ups. I had some other kids who have had sickle cell, but one student in particular had it really bad. She never had kidney failure, but that tends to be something that happens when you get older. And, you know, honestly, it can happen in your 30s and 40s. So, and, you know, you can get like a kidney transplant, but because it's a problem within your entire body, that new kidney is susceptible to failing as well. So, yeah. What's that? Yeah, exactly. Yep. And that happens with kidney failure in general, is that your skin, if you have lighter skin, you'll see that it's like yellow, your eyes, like the whites of your eyes will turn yellow. Okay. This part here, we're going to get into on Monday. But I would like to do an activity just so we can kind of talk about this idea about alleles. All right. So go ahead and you can put these notes in your binder.